Hi, everyone.
Welcome, everybody.
I'm Madeline Will. I'm here with my colleague, Daarel Burnette, and 3 educators who ran for a state legislature this year. They are part of a massive wave of teachers who ran for office at all levels. Education Week counted nearly 180 current classroom teachers who ran for their state legislature. And while just 43 of those teachers won, including 2 here, it was still a huge display of teacher activism that followed a season of strikes and walkouts. So before we get started with this conversation, we have an exclusive interview with Johanna Hayes, who is the 2016 National Teacher of the Year and who was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives.
I'm Johanna Hayes, and I am the representative-elect from Connecticut 5. I am the 2016 National Teacher of the Year and an educator. When I was on the campaign trail, a lot of my skills as a teacher came into play, and it really wasn't as much about the conversation surrounding education as people think, but it was about those skills of collaborating and working with different people and explaining ideals and critical thinking and all of those basic skill sets that are used for effective leadership. We saw around the country so many teachers walking out, going on strike. And as an educator, I know that that is the hardest decision a teacher ever has to make. And we saw that happening time and time again, where people are just concerned about the narrative surrounding our profession, about decisions that are being made in relation to our profession, with no teachers at the table, with no educators as part of the conversation. I think that Secretary DeVos, one of the things I am, a little disappointed about is that it seems like many of the decisions are made in isolation. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I think I know what you're trying to do, but by the time it gets to me, I need for you to understand what that looks like for kids. I need for you to understand how that will disproportionately impact the children in my communities. My campaign from beginning to end was less than 6 months from the moment I decided till the election. And I spent most of that time trying to assure myself that I was qualified to do this, that I had a voice, I had something to say. And what I realized every time I got in a situation or had to speak, I realized this is what we do every day. This is what teachers do, just in the geography is different, but we solve problems every day. We bring people together every day. We collaborate, we communicate, we evaluate the information and come up with solutions. And I think we have to give ourselves permission to do that outside of the classroom. And there is no blueprint for this.
Well, as Stephen from NGA mentioned before, states have had a very hard time raising revenue, and boosting teacher pay can cost billions of dollars. But several candidates on the campaign trail, as Maddie and I witnessed, basically said, we're going to tackle this issue this next legislative session. So we have 3 great guests here today who came fresh off the campaign trail. Right next to me, we have John Waldron. He's a social studies teacher at Booker T. Washington High School, who in his second run for state office won a House seat in Oklahoma State Legislature. We have R. Travis Brenda, who's a math teacher at Rockcastle High School in Mount Vernon, Kentucky. He actually beat the majority leader, Jonathan Schell, in the Republican primary. And we have Aimy Steele, who is a former principal of Beverly Hills Elementary School in Concord, North Carolina. She ran against an incumbent and lost by just a handful of votes. So let's start with you, John, and we'll ask all the candidates the same question. Tell us about your experience. Why did you run?
Well, as you said, this is my second race. I first ran in 2016, and I ran because, well, they made me mad. And they shouldn't have done that. We put 25,000 people around the state capitol to protest for better education funding, and that same day, the Oklahoma State Senate cut the state income tax, further reducing the funding available for education. That was not going to stop unless we did something about it. So I filed first in 2015 and again in 2017 for this race in 2018.
You were telling me backstage you knocked on how many doors?
12,000 on this round.
Wow. Okay, so Mr. Brenda, why did you run? What was your experience like?
Well, originally, a lot of people thought I was just running because I was a teacher and the pensions were at the forefront. But for me, it actually started at a back-to-school prayer service, August of 2017. We always, the week before school starts, our pastor and his wife always call the kids down and pray over them. And then anyone that works in the school system, bring those down and pray. And our pastor's wife, when she got to me, she had a very specific prayer that I was the spiritual Esther, and it was time to rise lest I perish, but if I perish, I perish. And there was a lot of confirmation after that. So even though education was an important part of the campaign, it really is what I feel like God has called me to. And God's opened the doors, and here I am.
Tell us about your opponent.
Mr. Shell was the floor majority leader. He, in the primary, spent just over, I think, $130,000 compared to my $15,000. And it was a really exciting experience. I think in the primary, the unofficial results on that night was I won by 123 votes. And then it's a primarily Republican district. There are somewhere over 22,000 Republicans, 10,000 Democrats, and 2,000 other. So I'd been told early on, even before I filed, that if Mr. Shell was going to be beat, he would have to be beat in the primary. There were some others in other districts that educator candidates that were running in the minority party, and they were not successful because of running in the minority party.
Well, Ms. Steele, you're a principal, which is sort of counter-narrative, and we did a story about principals running. It's a very unusual phenomenon, but why did you run? What was your experience like?
So I actually ran for office because, similar to John, we had a situation where our state legislature created a K-12 class size mandate, or K-3 class size mandate. And as an elementary principal, when my superintendent or assistant superintendent says, this is what we need to do to comply with state law, then you have to manifest that in the classroom the best way you know how. And one of the ways we had to do that was really kind of pushing teachers out of certain classroom spaces in order to make space for other teachers and reduce the class sizes without any additional financial resources. And so that was kind of the tipping point for me, where we had to do that one year, and then the next year I received a call that said, make room for 5 more teachers. And I said, well, at this point, I'm going to have classes in the media center, the gymnasium, and the auditorium, which is the cafeteria, also known as the cafetorium. So what would you like for me to do? So, those types of experiences really led me to start pointing the finger to other people saying, hey, you should run, you should run, you should run. And while I was pointing at them to tell them to run, other teachers and administrators, all of those other fingers were pointing back at me saying, why not you? Why not now? So that's why I chose to run, and it's been quite an exciting journey. Exciting is, it's a word filled with lots of emotion. I'm sure you can feel what I'm saying here, but it's come with a lot of lessons learned, a lot of information that we've had to gain and garner as a new candidate and as a first-time candidate. So, it was interesting, to say the least.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear about what voters told you on the campaign trails. You're all from states that had walkouts, so I assume that education was fresh in their minds. So Amy, why don't we start with you? Like, what did you hear from voters?
So the number one issue in our area is affordable health care, or the lack thereof. So one of the main issues that spoke to me, or that I heard about, was always healthcare premiums, pre-existing conditions, and being denied coverage even though premiums were being paid. That was number one. Number two was affordable housing. We have an affordable housing crisis. Like nationwide, there's a book called Eviction, and that book really highlights the problem in our nation with affordable housing for people who have jobs but still cannot afford to live in the communities where they work. So that was the second issue. And then, of course, education was a top priority. I was actually the principal of a school that was facing being closed down because of funding and just a lot of different issues related to the infrastructure of the building, et cetera. And so I heard a lot about those types of things, neighborhood schools, the need to have smaller schools that are not so large that they really don't allow for the community that the neighbors wanted. So those were kind of the 3 top issues that we faced and that we heard from on the campaign trail. I remember one particular instance about affordable housing where I walked up to a home to knock on the door, and there were 2 people on the porch, and I said, well, is this your home? And they said, no, this is the home of a family member. We're waiting on him to get home. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, so do you live here? And they said, no, we're homeless. And I said, oh, okay. So, you know, that is a real issue that we face in our nation. And, you know, at that point, it's not about the vote, right? It's about taking care of their needs. And so as an educator, what do? I went into educator mode, you know, call the resource, call here, call there, try to figure it out. But, you know, those are kind of some of the things that we saw on the campaign trail.
So Travis, you, during the primary, your opponent had co-authored the pension reform bill. So was pensions a big topic for voters?
It was, and a lot of focus was on educators, but that pension reform bill affected all state employees. And I'm in a rural district, House District 71, where you're hard pressed to find somebody that does not have some connection to a state employee. And that was hitting a lot of families close to home. That pension bill was brought forth, and from introduction to passage was somewhere between 6 and 8 hours. They took a sewage bill, Senate Bill 151, stripped all the language out of it, and put the pension bill in a sewage bill. And that upset a lot of people. It's still before the Kentucky Supreme Court. It has been ruled unconstitutional by a lower court and is expected, I think it's going to be overturned by the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court. Some other issues that came up through the campaign because of it being a rural district: job creation, building the infrastructure, having an education to prepare young people to be able to step into jobs and be able to perform on day one, but also being able to have people that can pass a drug test. The opioid epidemic is hitting a lot of people hard close to home. I have a lot of students, and I'm now in my 20th year of teaching, and in that time period, the number of students that are not being raised by their parents but someone else has skyrocketed. I had a student last year that is being raised by his great aunt, but he calls her mom because that's the only mom he's ever known. So all of those issues came about through the campaigning, and it's just things that I see every day in the classroom.
So, John, this was your second campaign, but of course this one was right after the walkout. So did you feel education was more on voters' mind than the last time?
Definitely. When I got to the point where I'd knock on your door and say, hey, I'm John Waldron, I'm a candidate for the State House, and I'm a public school teacher, and you already know why I'm at your door, don't you? And they would say, yeah, I do. I mean, I was a teacher and I ran on an education platform, but I think what we might all agree that the fundamental issue isn't education, it's democracy. We've had a lot of uncompetitive elections in the past, and we've had a lot of elections settled by primaries or by a candidate winning once and then serving 6 terms without ever being challenged again. And consequently, we've had a lot of bad politics in states like Oklahoma, where narrow interest groups get to drive the agenda, and then the effects are felt on public services like education, healthcare, roads, et cetera. So when I came out there, I would start a conversation about how important education is, but also how it relates to so much else. And I mean, as a candidate, you're really there to give the voters a voice. And that's why I knocked 12,000 doors. People hadn't had a candidate ever come to their door before. And that's the thing that's empowering and encouraging about this process. Yeah, I was an education candidate, but it goes far beyond that.
So you guys are all from states where there were walkouts. So why did teachers in your state walk out? Why not just work for the union and lobby during the regular legislative session? So John, let's start with you. You guys are in Tulsa. You guys walked 100 miles to Oklahoma City?
Some of us did, yeah.
All right.
What we learned from rallies and meetings and stuff is that you don't get what you want for your kids, for the people, by asking nicely. You've got to be a little bit more assertive than that. So we had a friend of mine did take on that walk. He walked from Tulsa to Oklahoma City over 7 days. We had snow, hail, and a minor earthquake along the way. Wow. And he walked that whole distance, and by the end of it, he was a candidate. He came as an ordinary protester, advocate, and he came out and he was a candidate. asking nicely doesn't cut it when you have a legislature that's set on tax cuts or flat budgets at a time when your costs are rising and more students are coming into the system. So I learned from talking to the politicians that they would listen to you when you were strong and not until then. So my campaign was about making the cause of education strong again in Oklahoma City.
In Kentucky, the walkout that occurred back, I think it was in April or March, was not about increased funding for teachers. We were not asking for a pay raise. We were not asking for anything other than what we had been promised in our contractual agreement that's actually in Kentucky revised statutes. And they were looking at cutting benefits, the benefits that we were promised when we signed the contract saying that we were agreeing to teaching in the public sector at a lower rate than if we were working in the private sector. And I told people throughout the campaign, I do not see the retirement pay for state employees as retirement pay, but rather deferred compensation. That is, we're told during our jobs, while we're educating or doing whatever, state police, social workers, whatever, we agree to work at a lower rate in exchange for being taken care of in our retirement years. And they were looking at cutting that. Later in the session, even though they said that they raised the primary funding for schools to $4,000 per student for the first time ever, it was an increase of about $18 per student over the previous biennium. While they were saying we're raising it here, they were cutting other areas, so actually school districts were going backwards. So that was the purpose of the walkout in Kentucky. The protest, there were estimates to be between 12 and 14,000 people at the Capitol on that one day that every school district in the state of Kentucky was closed. And my mom is a retired state worker. My sister teaches in the feeder middle school for the high school where I work. After school was canceled, we went up that day for that first protest, and we thought it was a huge crowd outside on the steps of the Capitol. But then when we walked inside, and the whole halls were filled, and it was standing room only, it was really powerful. As far as unions in Kentucky, we don't have unions per se. We do have the Kentucky Education Association, but it is just an association that helped. They were very instrumental in sharing the information with state employees. And the labor unions also were very vocal in the opposition to that pension reform bill as well.
So, Ms. Steele, as district superintendents and principals were managing all these teachers walking out, you yourself got on a bus and protested too.
Yes, actually, so I actually drove, but I did protest, and there were tens of thousands. I think the estimates maybe came in at close to 100,000 teachers in North Carolina who were protesting in Raleigh, and so I was a member of that group because I felt a solidarity to the teachers. Back in 2008, as a teacher, a Spanish teacher in Concord, our salaries were frozen at, wherever they were, for whatever level, they were frozen. And they never caught up to inflation, but our General Assembly claimed that they still spent more on public education than any other legislature. So that was problematic because we knew the numbers and we were a part of the numbers and we were there when the salaries were frozen. So we protested for increased spending on education, increased professionalism and being treated like a professional in the field of education, but then also we protested against some of the mandates that were passed down without a viable way to make sure they were implemented, such as K-3 class size with no additional funding. So those are the things that we marched for, and so I give honor to all of those who marched that day. It was an incredible day, but it was essential to send a message because we are a non-union state. So similar to Kentucky, we have an association of educators called NCAE, and they did a phenomenal job of organizing the march, but it was essential to make sure teachers know that their voices can be heard and should be heard. I think for us as educators, for so many years, we are told and trained to be neutral and to not have a political opinion about anything and to not be political. So the march was a way to bring together Democrats, Republicans, independents, really anyone who cares about the efficacy of our profession, and also the fact that we teach and educate children who are our #1 clients. So it was essential for me to be right there with my teachers and with the teachers from our county and from our state. And so as a result of that march, different groups spun off of that. And so now there are support groups on Facebook, on social media. There are teachers who gather within their respective counties. In our county, Cabarrus County, we have Cabarrus Teachers United. So it's so important for teachers to really raise up and understand that we all have a voice, but we're not going to get that voice heard by sitting by and playing nicely, similar to what he said. We have to engage in the action. So that's why I marched, and today is Wednesday, so Red for Ed, for all those who are supporting Red for Ed.
I should mention that Oklahoma is also, we have an Oklahoma Education Association, not a union, and maybe that's one of the reasons all three of us are on this stage.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
So, teachers were so fired up after the walkouts. So many filed to run for office. Most did not win. So I'm curious to hear your perspectives on what's next for the teacher activism movement. Do you see teachers continuing to be so engaged and to stand up and run for office again or walk out again? Or what do you see as next?
Well, I want to first be the first one to say that although I did not win, I learned so much. And as an educator, we are continuous lifelong learners. That's kind of the mantra of being an educator. And so you have to continue learning. But in addition to that, we have to continue showing all the little people that we won't give up in whatever capacity that is. So whether I run again or not, it is up to me to continue this advocacy and this work, and I think it is for all educators to do the same. So regardless of the outcomes, I think teachers are so resilient and have a certain amount of grit that they're going to continue going regardless of the outcomes, and they're going to continue to make sure their students are engaged in the civic process to further this education that we've gained by being on the campaign trail. I do want to say this, as Congresswoman-elect Hayes said, there is no blueprint for running for office. There's the Wellstone way, and there's this way and that way, and all of these materials and resources, but there is really no set way to run in your particular area for a local municipal race or for a state race or for a congressional race. There are all these prescribed, concepts, like you should do this, you should knock doors. We made 40,000 voter contacts between calls, text messaging, and knocking doors. I knocked hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of doors, well, thousands. But anyway, there's so many things that are contained within this process of running for office. And as educators, we weren't really privy to that prior to running. We ran to be advocates. We ran to represent people. And then all of the other things happened. It's kind of like being a teacher. You go in to teach a subject and to work with children. And then you have all of these things that you have to do, and same thing as a principal. So I think once we kind of fine-tune some of those processes, we'll be even more successful in the future. But we must keep the work going in the in-between.
And I think Kentucky was similar. Most of the educators that were on the ballot were first-time candidates, including myself. For me, my campaign, the focus was the primary because of who my opponent was. And I'd been told early on that if he was going to be beaten, it would have to be in the primary. There were some that their main race was not until the general election. So there was a little bit of time for things to kind of cool down a little bit. Some of those other educator candidates were also running as write-in candidates, which is always difficult. But I think everyone that was involved learned a lot through the process and will be ready to come back the next time. As I've mentioned earlier today, I think I was running on the party that was the majority party in my district. There were some of those that were not running on the majority party, but were rather running on the minority party. And that's difficult. In my district, Republicans outnumber Democrats 2-1. And for those candidates that were running in those minority parties in their districts, that was difficult. But hopefully we've all learned. For myself, I had a lot of volunteers working behind the scenes from both Democrats and Republicans that were out helping knock on doors, sharing Facebook and Twitter posts, and just helping spread the word. And some of the information that I've gotten since the general election is there were some of the other candidates that were having trouble finding volunteers. There were 12 to 14,000 show up at the Capitol to protest, but not helping volunteer, and that's important. If you feel strongly about an issue, then find the candidate that aligns with that and help them out.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, in Tulsa, most of the teacher candidates lost, but we flipped a red seat. And we had a lot more competitive races in places we hadn't had before. So what happens next? Next, I think we set up a candidate school. The people who ran impart their experiences on others who might run. We recruit more candidates. We get more teachers to go out and do the organic work of knocking on doors and organizing that is more important, I think, than showing up at a rally. So do that too, please. You know, if you ran last time and you're willing to run again, well, let's start in 12 months, not 6 months before the election. Let's make sure there's adequate seed money for you to get started. If you're new to campaigning, we're going to help you understand your most basic functions, and we're going to help you get staff. And if you don't want to run, well, how would you like to be a volunteer coordinator? That's basically a professional texter. I have one in the house right now. You help get out the foot soldiers that make a campaign work. So we get organized. That's what teachers do. We learned a lot, we built a lot, and we're going to build on that in 2020 and 2022 and on, because this doesn't end, does it?
No.
I think we're going to start taking questions after my last question here, so if you want to start lining up at the mic here. So speaking politically, we have a new legislative session starting up in a couple of weeks. A lot of the demands that teachers asked for were not met. So what is your strategy going forward? We have two winners on the stage. You guys are going to go to your state capital. What is your political strategy?
Well, budget is a reflection of your values. You show me your budget and I'll tell you what you care about. So we're going to fight hard in the budget to make sure that we increase per pupil spending. We reduce class sizes, and we empower teachers better to be able to do their jobs. We've been doing the opposite of all of those things in recent years. As a member of the minority party, I'm going to spend a lot of my time trying to keep things from happening. And maybe some of you might have read in the Post this week that there's a county GOP organization that called for the abolition of public education and argued that that was not a proper function of government. Yeah. And so we have to fight that. And that means we have to get out a broader message. We have to fight every day in the legislature, and we have to open up the windows of the legislature and let people know what's going on. The work of campaigning didn't end just because we got into office. The people of District 77 need to know why I'm doing the things I'm doing, and we need to call attention to what special interests and elites are trying to do to the public services on which we all depend. So fight, fight, fight.
Similar thing, it just have to keep staying focused and trying to build relationships with those that are there. Because as I've told other people, there are 100 legislators in the Kentucky House. I cannot do anything alone. It's going to take working with others, but as educators, we're used to stepping into the classroom every day, and whatever we face that day, we meet head on. And we do the best that we can at the time, and it'll be no different in the legislature. Work with those that are there, whether I agree with them or disagree with them. I told several people over the last few months that I believe there's a few on the extreme right and a few on the extreme left that are really vocal, but I think most people are more either right of center or left of center, and we should be able to sit down and come to an agreement and be able to say, okay, here's where I stand on that issue. Where do you stand? Okay, let's compromise and meet somewhere in the middle and do what we can that's best for the people of Kentucky.
No, pensions is not an easy task to tackle. So what are your thoughts about how to fix a pension crisis in Kentucky?
Well, there were some major changes made in 2013. And with the economy improving, there have been some different studies that have shown that with those changes that were made 5 years ago, if it is funded the way it was supposed to be, that it's going to be okay, that it's making progress. There was a misconception throughout the campaigning that that the pension systems, there are 8 different pension systems in Kentucky, that the misconception was that they had to be 100% fully funded, and that's not accurate. As long as they were somewhere between 70 and 80% funded, then it's considered viable. The only reason it would need to be 100% funded is if all of those benefits had to be paid out today. So we need to continue making sure that funding is there. Over 15 of the last 22 years, they were not properly funded. The recession of 2008 hit. That's why we are where we are now. It's not because of it's a broken system, but rather it was not funded the way it should have been. When Governor Paul Patton was in office, probably 10, 12 years ago, all of the state pension systems were funded at 125%. There was a need came up, he reached over and took some money and used it for a project. Every governor since then has done the same thing. So Governor Bevin has said that there's a hole in the bucket and it keeps draining out. The problem is the hole's in the top of the bucket, people keep reaching in and grabbing. And so we need to put a lid on the bucket.
Yeah.
Okay. So Ms. Steele, you lost your race, but
Right.
I think you said you plan on running. And North Carolina has an interesting situation in which you have a Democratic governor, Republican legislature. What are teachers' priorities next year?
So for teachers, I think the priority is still on the same things, increasing funding. We're 39th in per pupil funding, 37th in teacher pay. We still have a lot of work to do. And so although I didn't win by vote count, I learned a lot. So I learned who I needed to connect with and how best to advocate, even if I'm not an elected official. There are still, alliances that I've built and worked with, various state officials who are elected and friends and colleagues along the way on the campaign trail who did win their races. And so I still have impact and ability to be able to influence some of those decisions. So I plan to just stay active and stay involved in the community, but also to make my voice known on the state level as an advocate, because essentially that's what I would have been doing had I been elected. So that's what I plan to continue to do.
Great. Well, we're going to start taking audience questions, so feel free to line up at the microphone. Sir.
Yes, I wanted to talk about the popular pension issue that's on. I just moved back from California, which several years ago voted an income tax increase, funding, local controlled funding formula, really to help low-income schools with a lot of low-income kids. And as it turned out, in places like Los Angeles, all the money went to pensions. Whether it's okay or not, I don't know, but it all went to pensions, and now the teachers are striking because they didn't get enough of it out of the salary part of it. And I just wonder if that's not a part of the discussion here, that in terms of public support for these activities, or even maybe how many teachers. My dad worked in a low-income school for 35 years, taught, but still I wonder about public understanding where people, like with their Congress members, they tend to support their own individual Congress members, but think Congress is doing a bad job. I think there's a lot of public feeling about that in education, and I wonder how to deal with that, where more money can actually go to helping the kids that are having the hardest time achieving performance in education, as opposed to funding the system itself.
Thank you.
Do you guys think that people have a clear understanding of school funding?
No, it's very confusing. Our incoming governor has said that since the teachers received a raise, they're now the second highest in the region, which I guess is true by some manner of calculation, but it doesn't feel like that when you're a teacher, and that's why we have 2,600 emergency certified teachers in Oklahoma. Incidentally, I think when governors make statements like that, it drives more teachers out of the state because it's an indication of where the governor's going to go as a leader. Yeah, the truth is we do spend a lot on teacher pensions. It's expensive, and you don't see that in the private sector anymore. So it erodes the support base for teachers getting those benefits. But teachers, we need people who are willing to dedicate a lifetime to education. You need career teachers, and we're watching that class erode and disappear in this country, certainly in states like Oklahoma. And the pensions and benefits have always been part of the social safety package that we've guaranteed educators for putting up with, no offense to your juvenile children, all these years. And I love them, and they're wonderful. I heard an education reformer say at a Chamber of Commerce breakfast once, we can't just keep cutting the budget to education, but we can't keep funding it the way we have and expect things to go on. And I wonder what that means. We're going to have to find a way to compensate teachers, and I'm a big supporter of Retired Educators Association, because if we take care of them, it's an indication that the system will take care of us, and therefore we should stay in the job. And when you apply a private sector model to it, well, public schools aren't private sector institutions. It's a social contract, and you have to be very careful when you meddle with that.
In Kentucky, I think it's important that everyone understand that teachers do have, I think it's around 12.5% taken out of our paychecks to go into our pension. We also have 1.75% taken out to pre-fund cost of living adjustments that we get back during our retirement years, but only at a rate of 1.5% cost of living adjustment each year. So we're having more withheld to receive that back at a lower rate. And I think it's important to communicate that with the general public that is not in education, but similar things for the other state employees as well. And I think communication is key there. There's been so long that the funding has not been put into the pension system, the 15 out of 22 years, that the state has benefited during that time because they've not had to revise the tax system that's pretty much been in place since I think around 1939. I think our society has changed a little bit in the last 80 years, slightly, and our tax system is similar. I know in Kentucky there has been a push to look at something as simple as revising the gas tax because of the increased fuel efficiency of vehicles and the hybrid vehicles, so we're not getting as much state dollars coming in because of less tax generated because of more fuel efficient vehicles. So there's a whole lot of things that have to go into that. It does not necessarily need to be looked at as an isolated case, but there's a lot of things that need to go together.
I'll yield.
All right.
Hi, I'm actually also from Education Week. My name's Elizabeth Rich. I'm the commentary editor. We are not the only ones that have been thinking about and writing about the sort of larger picture here. There were protests. This time it feels different. Mr. Waldron, you mentioned, we're angry. It's about democracy. I just wonder if you might speculate or tell us what you think is going on that makes this election year feel so different for teachers, particularly.
Well, it's either that teachers have reached a breaking point where they're no longer willing to put up with the things that have been put upon us, especially since 2008, and now we're coming back and fighting for a more civilized system, or it's a last stand. We're seeing public institutions breaking apart. We're seeing a loss of public confidence in institutions in our country. We're seeing a lack of voter participation, increased income inequality, and educators find themselves at the epicenter of all of this. So maybe what we're doing now is recalling the best elements of American democracy. We're getting up and seeing what's at risk, and now we're fighting to restore a system that needs to work better. Or we're watching the breakup of public schools and the social contracts that have existed before and the creation of some newer form. But I'm worried that that newer form is going to be a meaner form of living in this country, and we need and deserve better here in the 21st century. So I'm hopeful that the citizens of America will be behind us in the next battles. Everybody says they are when you come to the door. Will you be with us when it comes time to vote your values?
Yeah, I will definitely agree with John that, people we've just had enough. Enough is enough. And it's time to stand up for what we believe in and it's time to make our voices heard. And I believe that teachers in Cabarrus County, in District 82 in North Carolina, are understanding that there's no union that's going to come and save us, that we have to save ourselves. So we have to continue to take that fight back to the political space and do what we can to overcome, especially for the people we serve.
Loretta Goodwin, American Youth Policy Forum. Thanks very much for what you've shared so far. I was wondering about the impact on your students and what the example of you as teacher activists has set for those students, and what kind of conversations you had with your students as you were engaged in this process, and what you see down the road for this kind of activism, what it means for student engagement.
Oh, sorry, that's okay. So I've been a K-12 Spanish teacher, but most recently was the principal of an elementary school. And so when I first announced my candidacy in December of 2017, and started to make my students aware, and parents and community members, some of the students, they didn't have quite a full understanding of what it meant to run for state house. And so they asked if I was running for president, if I was, running for, mayor, and is it like that, Miss Steele? What is it like? What do you mean? So the understanding and the education process of just K-5 students is immense, and it's quite fun and exciting. They wanted to help, they wanted to volunteer. Some of my students made campaign donations, and to help out because they thought Miss Steele needed some money, and we did, right? So that was fun and exciting, but I think just them seeing that I was willing to follow after the calling that was on my life was the lesson. That was the beginning of the lesson. And then to show them along the way what that looks like, the resilience, the grit, the determination that you need to run for office, it spoke volumes to them. I'm a mother of 5 with kids ranging from age 7 to 18. And so my own children were able to witness this, and all of my kids attend public school. And so they were able to witness it, but not only that, they were able to witness what do people say about their mommy when they go to school. So basically, what do parents say around their kids about other candidates running for office? And so that was interesting because they had to create a sense of advocacy. And then the most special thing happened where some of my high school students, where I taught Spanish, they were coming back to be volunteers on the campaign, to knock doors, to speak and lead the Latino initiatives in Spanish for some of our Spanish voters who spoke Spanish. And so that was really exciting to see all of them engaged where they fit. I had one young lady, 2 actually, step up, and they were in their 20s, whom, I taught, they were in my school, right? And they said, we want to help with social media and these types of things. So allowing students to serve where they fit was, that was probably the best series of moments on the campaign trail. And, I learned some of the issues that were important to them, student loans and the possibility of having them forever like a child, having their needs met in terms of affordable housing and healthcare and some of their parents' concerns. So it was essential to have students working right next to me, with me on this campaign trail. So,
I had students that were excited, and it was exciting to me to see the excitement that these students had. Students in all my years of teaching, I had never seen such excitement for politics, and for, if nothing else, for them to take an interest in the world around them in a way that they had never done before. It was really exciting to me. Also seeing some of those Facebook posts and tweets about, I got to vote for the first time, and I got to vote for Mr. Brenda today. It's pretty special.
That is. In Oklahoma, we had a 2-week, work stoppage, which extended the school year. And I think that was a little distressing to some of the seniors, and they followed with a 2-week work stoppage of their own when we got back. But I think teachers, our tendency is to, when we're asked to do more with less, we do more with less. And the students got used to seeing us get beat up a lot. And I think young people appreciated watching us stand and fight back. I think a lot of people learned lessons from that. And I was honored to have students of mine and former students work on my campaign. I have one here today. And that was really encouraging and inspiring. And it really also informed my freshman government unit on local campaigns and elections. The young people needed to see that teachers are agents, not just a piece of the system, but that they can be the change they wish to see in the world.
Yes.
And maybe kids can too. So I think that was one of the outcomes of this whole series that we're going to see go on into the future.
Good afternoon. Thanks first and foremost for your commitment as educators and for your courage running for office. My name is Julie Kirk. I'm with the National Association for College Admission Counseling. Thus, my question relates to school counselors. I'm curious to hear how you all see similarities between some of the challenges that school counselors and teachers face in your school, and maybe how some of those similarities may have presented themselves in your campaigns, and perhaps how you may plan to incorporate some of those similarities as you take office in your state house.
Well, we really need to empower school counselors. Once their job was to counsel students, and now they administer standardized tests all too often. They've been given so many burdens by a system that didn't provide additional resources for it, that things like traditional counseling, taking care of the well-being of the students and helping them get into college are falling by the wayside. And I think you've also seen, colleges have seen that the incoming group of No Child Left Behind educated students are good at answering questions, but not good at coming up with questions. They can master and marshal facts, but have we been giving them enough opportunities to think for themselves? So if we go back to the question of counselors, I mean, they're faced with the same pay scale as teachers and other issues like that, but only half of this is about material issues. The other half is about whether we're empowering educators, and that includes counselors, to do their job and fulfill the potential of these kids. The kids are really the most important resource that you have in the classroom. They can tell you what it is you need to do for them, and our system ought to let us, including counselors, do that. So we have to pay for good public schools. We have to make sure teaching is a profession people can raise a family on. But we should also go back to the business of making our schools and our teachers and our school employees centers of empowerment and not just pieces of bureaucratic cogs in a wheel.
So I want to answer that question as well, because being on the campaign trail, I worked with counselors. So for 7 months, I was actually still actively a principal. And one of the things that I noticed is that, counselors face an immense amount of pressure to still meet the demands of the job and the national counseling requirements, and then also take care of the needs of the students from a mental health perspective, as we see so many social issues manifest in the classroom and in the school, and then also meet the need to be the standardized test givers and organizers and things like that. So I think, as John said, we have to continue to empower all educators, from psychologists to school nurses to counselors to teachers, teachers' assistants, custodians, everyone, as they need to advocate for their positions. But also, we just have to realize we are facing a crisis that we've never seen before, where so many students are facing mental health issues. Counselors are essential to the fabric of our schools. And right now in North Carolina, they're allocated somewhere between 1 to 500 or just under 500 or 1 to 600. It's really ridiculous. And so the local LEA is responsible for making sure that they allocate even more counselors per pupil. And so they can pay to have extra counselors to reduce that ratio. But it's impossible, in my opinion, for a counselor to serve 500 students adequately and meet their needs. So we all have to continue to advocate for those students and for those counselors.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name's Cheryl Gibbs Binkley, and I am on the strategy team for the Badass Teachers Association, a national group, by the way, and for Virginia Educators United, which is working on momentum in Virginia right now for a similar grassroots movement to what you guys have already been participating in. My question for you is, what you kind of answered some of that in your answer to the last question, which is we've experienced a pretty ghastly reform movement for the last 15 to 20 years that has been progressively becoming more destructive and onerous to our beloved schools, and people are now refusing to cooperate with that anymore. But what then do you see as the next iteration, not at the upper policy levels, but in your schools, on the ground? How is this going to change how we're able to educate our students in our individual communities and schools?
Maybe you should go first.
Well, in Kentucky, I feel like there's been a push to move toward charter schools, which in essence will be taking money from the public schools and putting those teachers in with less resources than we have now, even though there have been cuts. When adjusted for inflation, the funding for the next biennium falls behind the dollar figures for 2008, 2009. So there's going to have to be additional funding. There's going to have to be an increase, just because by staying the same with inflation, we continue to fall further behind. So that there's going to have to be something looked at with that to increase that funding at the school level.
And to that effect, I think we need to allow teachers to do what they do best, and that's to solve problems. And so teachers, educators need to come together and be a part of the conversation around what are the flaws in the way education funding is currently, or education system is currently funded, and how can we attack it and correct it and fix it. I think teachers are more than capable of coming together and doing that, but we have to be given the opportunity, and at this point, we just have to take it. So take your state budgets and look at them and literally try to solve the problem. In STEM education, we focus on problem-based learning all the time. We give the students a real-world problem, and we ask them to go through a series of steps in order to solve the problem. That contains merit and value with teaching critical thinking skills and making sure we involve those who are impacted by whatever the decision is in the process of solving the issue. So that's one step critically that I think we need to take.
Well, I think we're out of time, but please join me in thanking our great guests.